So I thought a little bit about this. I came up with some questions. So I have my little cheat sheet. My old man glasses are going to go on so I can read them. I thought if we look at the kinds of challenges people face in the technology industry, when you're building a startup, the easiest way to get a sense of the real effort that goes into it is to look at people's scars. So anyone who's been in a startup has had some kind of scars from a mistake they've made, a decision that didn't go the way they expected, and it leaves a mark. And so what I thought I would start with is maybe just run down the panelists and give me an example of a scar, a decision, something that went a completely different direction than you expected. What did you learn from that experience? How did that go?
I can say choosing the technology stack, I think, is the belief, right? That you start out with something and then where you end up. And then most of that, I think, when I started the company, I used to have this get-go feeling that, okay, you start out with something, do it. And then it will automatically get you in the longer way. But what happens is you have other factors as well. I think developers availability, and then there are so many factors that you need to counter in when you wanted to go for longer. That's the one of the scar that we left out with is the choosing the front-end technology stack. And then we did not get much of the developer support, and then we did not get much of like even the forums or Stack Overflow. And then we were struggling a lot, I think, with the technology stack. And then later we decided, I think, we have to choose a technology stack that most people use in the world. That's how I say that, as I think choosing the technology stack is the critical. I think whatever it is, choose with more developers availability, and then as well as how do you make it more in the longer run. That's what I say as one of the scar that we left with, I think, when we started out the company with.
Okay, for me, it's a little different, not so much in technology, but as a whole business. So the first company I started was around 22 years back, and over these 22 years, multiple companies. And I think in almost all cases, one thing was common, that before starting the company, whatever idea we had, but let's say that 6 months or 1 year into running the company, many times it had to change 100%. And sometimes because we, let's say that imagining the problem, that what will be there, to many variations of that. So ultimately, I think almost round after round, changing the product itself, changing the whole focus. And sometimes even when a product was running successfully, but because of market change, sometimes all of a sudden, everything had to change, sometimes including the tech stack.
Yeah, so for us, a bit of a background about what we tried doing and where we really had a lot of challenges. So we are into the Kubernetes space, and way back in 2013 and 14 is when the community was really started picking up. And by 2015, we had a product launched, and I think that was the first and foremost challenge where we started facing. We were too early in the market, and we were not able to really keep up pace with how the community was growing. And secondly, if we look at 2014, there were a lot of bifurcation on different orchestration engines, and we were not really sure which is going to really be the one orchestration engine that we have to focus on. I think being too early in the market was what I think was a bigger challenge for us.
So just to give you a brief background, we are Merax, and we help you build goal-based retention and engagement journeys for all of your customers. And one of the biggest challenges, or you can say the pivots that we have had, is about the market. I think the market is the ultimate decider. As entrepreneurs, we can dream and we can think about a lot of stuff, but if the market doesn't accept it, then you have to choose a way that market is showing you. And for us, so you can say 6 months back, we were trying to build, you can say, a churn prediction system, where we were trying to tell that who is at risk, but what our customers actually required was what to do to retain them. They did not just want to know who is at risk. So we pivoted, and now here we are. Today we are solving this.
So I heard pivot a couple of times, and one of the things that the classic in startups is pivoting, right? I say pivot, you say how hard or how many times. And most companies tend to do several pivots as they start and they branch out. Each of you has a different sort of tenure in each of your companies. I think we've got the youngest on the end in both age and company age. So when looking at pivots, I mean, what kinds of situations have you seen and how did you recognize the need to pivot? What was your driving factor and what drove you into a pivot? Was it a technology issue? In one case, you said you saw a technology challenge. Would you consider that something that forced you to pivot your focus?
I mean, yes, that's a technology pivot that I certainly talked about. I think that left a scar, but I think we are able to keep up with the latest technology, and then we are able to move on. But when it comes to the business pivot, right? I think it's basically finding that product market fit, like which one works. You know, that's the whole idea of. I think you started out with a product, and then is it what customers want, or is it something that you'd like to move in a different direction? You know, that's the pivot that we have done multiple times, I think, in terms of our volunteer management platform or the crowdfunding platforms. Like we started out with is the crowdfunding for only nonprofits, and then we moved to we should expand this platform to anyone should be able to run their crowdfunding campaigns. You know, that's kind of the pivots that we have done. When it comes to the technology pivot, yes, that's one of our major pivot in terms of our platform area. I think that's how I can say pivot is. And then how hard it is? Yes, it is. It's not easy because it's a motivation factor for the team. You know, that's the whole thing. Like when we are changing something, I think how do we make sure that I think your team is aligned with it? That's the biggest challenge that you always face, because the team always feels, why is that? I think you're always changing something. And then how do you make sure that I think you reconcile that with the team is the key thing in the pivot. I think if you don't get the team along with you, that you cannot move fast as you want. You know, that's one of the hardest thing is making team understand why we are pivoting and then what is the need for it. You know, that's always a bigger challenge for us. I think that's what I think we are able to achieve that thing so far well. You know, that's what I say. Yeah.
Okay, I will take just one example. I think in my entire journey, I think I won't be even able to count that how many pivots we had to do. So around year 2000, we started working mostly for banks. And our domain was, at that time, it was called knowledge management and content management, including bit of what we call today AI, for banks primarily. And everything was doing great. We were doing great revenue. We had a great team. But come year 2004-05, there was a downturn. And we almost reached something like zero revenue in a year. So all of a sudden, from doing very good to all of a sudden very down. So at that time, we started thinking, what next? So we took our tech assets, our functionality that we had, but then we repositioned the entire product and company onto the media sector. Even because nobody in media sector knew. So we rebranded the product, we did fresh marketing, and this product actually did even better than the previous one, even though technologically it was quite similar. So that's my current company name that I'm currently representing, Creatio. So this product was created out of an old product which was already sold to banking, but under a different branding.
Okay, so for us, I mean, we started out with the consulting and implementation mindset, and then we started realizing that there is a use case that is slowly evolving across all the clients that we are serving, and we found like DevOps is going to be a core part of the business. And so that's when we started, building a product, and that's the pivot that we actually made. So for us, the difficulty is, selling a vision of where this product is going to be when, the Kubernetes kind of orchestration engine is still, under development. And okay, this is what is going to happen 4 years down the lane. And selling a vision when nothing is available around was a bigger challenge for us. Making that pivot was a little harder because for the developers to see, what they are building and this is how it actually fits into the use case was a bit of a challenge to sell the vision there.
So I'll try to answer this from more of an engineering side of things. So when you say pivot and how hard, right? It's all about, so as a startup, you have this power, you have agility to move around. You have this power to twist and turn as you like and so fast, right? And especially when you're building a software, which is complex, and it's and if you build it in a way where it's modularized, or I can say if it is built around, let's say, microservices design pattern, right? you can see these intrinsic layers in the system which are there to stay. For example, just to take an example, for us, it was the data processing layer. So data processing layer still exists in the platform, whether it was 6 months ago or 10 months ago or even today. So that has not changed. And the things which are built on top of that, they change. So the degree of change is lesser. And if you plan ahead a little bit, so I understand that you cannot plan ahead too well as well, because as a startup, you cannot build for scale immediately. But you have to think through, as in you have to build it in a way where you can maybe take those sharp turns when it's required.
Good. So one of the things, so just out of curiosity, a quick show of hands. I mean, how many of you are at very small startups? Say less than 20 people. Yeah, so yeah, you got to categorize very small. So most of you are in this mode where each decision impacts the entire company effectively at any given point in time. Each hire also impacts the entire company, right? So one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about is as your companies have grown, as you've reached out and tried to hire engineers, culture tends to be an incredibly important factor, right? If the team is dysfunctional, it literally doesn't function. You can't make forward progress. So I'm just curious for each of you, when you go out and try to hire, what's the culture you sought out? What were the challenges in finding people to fill the slots that you had? And just what have you learned from those experiences?
I mean, on the hiring wise, I have hired lot more people. I think I can tell about that. But when it comes to the hiring or the culture, I think I'm not. I cannot really talk much on the culture side of the things. But what I can say is, the one thing that I look when we hire for the company is attitude in towards the learning rather than what currently he has the experience with. Most probably, I think, because I think we are the smaller company, I think the things that we look at is easy able to adopt new things. I think, as I mentioned, I think when we need to change something, the people should be able to adopt to the change. And then are they able to learn new things? Or like I know the Raju mentioned before, are they wanted to stay with their technology stack like Python or Java? I think, but see, the need is constantly changing in the world right now. And then basically the way that I look at things is, I mean, the focus of the company is always like learn what to do rather than how to do it. You know, that's the key focus, because how to do it is becoming very easier because the knowledge base that you are getting in the world, I think in the Google or the information that is available is you have a lot of information on how to do things. But rather than, you need to understand the focus, the problem, the what to do, and then if the people are able to adopt to what to do, and then we are able to achieve how to do in whatever the language that is required for the client, or is it required for our company as well. That's what I look at, the attitude towards the learning. I think I see the one empathy the engineers should have. I think I still believe in, I think the first 18 months of my time, what I learned, and then what I put towards learning as an important thing, constant learning. And then that's what I completely focus on in the company as well. I think that's what I look at when I hire the new people. And then I know, do you have any troubles and after hiring the people? Yes, we did. And then we had to let few people go just because they're not ready for the change. You know, that's one of the biggest challenges that we always face. You know, even though I think we look at these things, it's not always happen in the same way that we think will happen. Yeah.
Okay, I will take a slightly different approach to this. So now we have a product which is already in production for more than 10 years. But at the same time, we have found that every 2 to 3 years, we have to quite reinvent the product to remain relevant, because the customer expectations are continuously changing, technology is changing, speed of computation is changing, so many things are changing. So now in this case, whenever we are hiring new people, so of course, tech skills we see, but more we see that whether they will be happy working here. Because if for whatever reason we can see that they are not going to be happy working here, and majority of the times it will be that the type of work environment they are looking at, and the type of work environment we are providing. Of course, we are flexible, but it's not that anything is going to change drastically in the next 2 to 3 months. So in that we are focusing quite a lot on that in terms of what they are expecting out of their job and what we are able to provide. And unless we see a match, we have realized that even if we hire, no matter how good they were, no matter how bad we were, it doesn't work out. So that particular aspect, we have started putting quite a lot of emphasis. And how to check? So generally, what we will do that, especially for all the critical recruits, we will make them talk to multiple peoples in our company. And we will also try to assess that whether he's finding it comfortable talking to those people, because those are the same very people, if he is recruited, he will be working with. So apart from technology, we have started quite a lot focusing on those aspects as well.
Yeah, so coming from a DevOps and microservices background, I think the most important culture that we look out for is empathy. So whenever somebody exposes an API or working on a user interface, I mean, they have to have an empathy of how my peers are going to use something that I write, or how my customers are going to consume whatever I'm exposing, right? So empathy is a really, I don't think we can actually identify that in the few rounds of interviews that we do, but that's something that we have to constantly look out for within the team, and then show some examples of how we have to empathize with our peers and then with the customers. I think that's very important for building a world-class product.
Sure. So I think building a startup is like driving a car in dense fog at 100 kilometers per hour. And you need people who can trust you to do that. And I think that's the biggest challenge, especially in getting new team members. And it's more about the cultural fit, I would say. People should have this burning passion to learn. Trying and failing is totally fine, but failing to try is a problem.
So I'm just curious, so multiple interviews is the most common thing that most companies will go through. Interviewers will compare notes after. Sometimes you'll pass notes, between interviews to have follow-ups or deep dives. Have any of you tried the panel interviews?
We do quite a lot.
You do panel interviews? And so what's your typical composition for a panel?
So in panel, then typically we will have somebody from our customer services department, because they are the people who are dealing with the customers. Of course, the people who will be reporting to, so that will be there. And sometimes depending on the role, so sometimes even DevOps may be there, just to check that, for example, we have had people that who were anti-automation. Now, our company, everything is automated in terms of deployment, or let's say that in terms of way the test pipelines and everything work. But if somebody doesn't like that type of work environment, then they are no good. So typically, if we are doing panel, then minimum 3, typically 4 people will be there.
Any other panel attempts?
So we don't really do panels. What we do is that first, if for engineering hires especially, we have this coding challenge hosted on HackerRank or someplace. So you do this coding challenge, and then you proceed to a conversation round, basically, you can say, where you just have a group discussion. It's not about the tech knowledge that you have. It's more about how you process problems, how you think about, how you approach a solution for a problem.
Actually, we do something else also, that when we go to a college, in particular for campus recruitments, there will be 4 people this side, and we will have 4 on the other side also in parallel. And surprisingly, it works quite well, especially in the campus hiring situations.
Good. So you can jump on panel? No. Okay. So one other area I wanted to touch on is open source itself, right? The open source ecosystem is incredibly rich. It varies wildly. And one of the areas that it varies wildly in is quality. And so as you're looking at your tech stacks and as you went to go build these out, I mean, you mentioned support as a key factor in open source. So, what have you seen that's not worked well? And I tend to focus on the negative sometimes. But what's not worked well for you in trying to leverage open source and trying to do an adoption based on, building on the shoulders of others?
To be honest, I think we use, I think, all the systems that we leverage, I think, are the open source, I think, in the company today. And then what did not work? I think, have we tried to build something on the open source and then which did not work? I think the one thing that I think we learned is, as I said, I think I'm not sure, I think, how many of you heard of Dun.js or the Ken.js. I think we are the first early adopters of those frameworks on the JavaScript side. And then when it comes to the Stack Overflow, the community, I think it's less, I think, as I said. And then, yes, building not on top of Ken.js, I think building on top of Ken.js, using those Ken.js framework and then building the applications is become trouble for us, right? And then that's when we realized, I think, should we not use open source? No, I think what we learned from that is, what we look at is, whenever we are looking at the open source now, I think we have a criteria for it. Like how many GitHub stars that they have, how many forks it has, how many committers the project has. Because when we are choosing the technology right now, the key areas are, these are the ones that we look at. And then how many questions the Stack Overflow has on the technology side. And then we are going for it. And then, yes, I think when we are choosing the open source technology, the one thing that we have to be strong, because we are a tech company. I mean, we are a high-tech company, as we already mentioned. I think I am a developer and then CEO as well. That's where my skill comes into the picture. And that's why when we choose the open source, I think the one thing that I always focus on is, will you be able to maintain it when there is no one else? That's the one criteria that you always look at, I think, when you're looking at the open source. And then once you take that decision that, yes, I can manage it, then I think it's okay to use open source. Unless you're looking at an enterprise. I know that we support the customers as well when you're going to the enterprise clients, and then they'll ask, who supports this? That's one of the major questions that we face. That's why we choose the open source, and then we choose the supported version of the open source. Like, I think, let's say we choose Cassandra, and then DataStax is the supporter of the Cassandra, like on the back, who backs it up? That's what we look at. I think, are there any companies that are supporting the open source products? And then we try to go with that support model as well when we are going for the enterprise customers. That's where we are.
Okay. So currently, almost all our underlying infrastructure is based on open source technologies. So over these years, we have seen, let's say when we started, almost no open source things. Maybe Linux was there, couple of compilers were there, but hardly any open source database that were stable enough. I'm talking about 96, 97, when I started my first company. But over the years, we have seen that the product quality in open source has gone up and up. So in these many years, we will say that we have learned quite a lot, that which one to pick and which one not to pick. Now, I can't give the full thing in 1 minute that how we do, but I will take a couple of examples. Let's say that our company now heavily relies on, let's say, PostgreSQL as database. Can we maintain PostgreSQL on our own? No, we can't. We don't have expertise, neither we are going to build expertise, even if nobody else is going to maintain or maintaining. But in this case, for example, PostgreSQL, we know that even if they stop, there are alternates we can very quickly switch into. So we see no harm. So similarly, everywhere, we go by very simple thing, that what is going to be our cost, A versus B versus C. What is many times going to be our opportunity cost, that how sooner we can start using it. And for many small things, we know that even if it is not supported by somebody, it is small enough, we understand this technology enough, we can adopt it and we can develop. So currently, I think as a whole, my companies put together are maintaining at least 6 or 7 different open source libraries, product here and there. Most of those were working, we started using, but either in the beginning itself or during the course of time, nobody is maintaining it. So we are maintaining it and we are giving it back. So in a way, we will say that in fact, the reverse is more true, that we will not like anything in our core of infrastructure, or at least deep dependency onto something which we are not clear about, whether paid or open source, that whether it is going to survive. Because we have seen, I think my companies are different with most of the others, that we are already running for 22 years, and the current Creatio product itself has been running in production for more than 10 years. So in this case, we have seen that no matter what we think that we will run for 3 years, ends up running for 3, 5, 6, 7 years. We don't know. So in that case, we will not like to focus onto something or anything that we have doubt that whether in 3 years it will be there or not. So that so in that case, actually, one counter example, that there are many open source products, I'm using the word products now here, which are exclusively supported by one company, including the directions. So those we are always skeptical using those. I'm not naming any of those.
Okay, so for us, I think I slightly lean more towards using something like a as a service model rather than taking an open source and customizing it. As long as it's not something that is a core part of what we do. But even if we had to choose an open source software, as Venkat pointed out, like we look for the community behind the open source projects and the support that comes along with that. But say, for example, if we had taken an open source and if there is a vulnerability, right? So who wants those vulnerabilities? When we package those software and we deliver it to our customers. So finally, we end up maintaining those software. So I kind of lean more towards using a software as a service kind of offering, yeah.
So I think we have heard good stuff about open source. I love open source. The world runs on open source. If you look at servers, today they all run on Linux distros. But if you look at, let's say, I'll take one example. Let's say, MongoDB. They changed their license to SSPL recently, and which is something which can happen to most of the open source tools in the coming future. So I would again repeat this, that so in the core of your infrastructure, you should always have your own software, the things that you're building on your own. And especially things which are non-core, especially databases or infrastructure-related stuff, that can definitely be, you can use open source for that. But open source is not free.
Yeah. So you also mentioned something earlier. So in the same vein around open source, obviously your company is very focused on AI and ML. That's a core piece of what you're trying to do. So in that vein, there's a lot of open source available from a framework perspective these days to support you in building out the kinds of algorithms you want to run. What do you do in terms of the trade-offs between the algorithms and the core data? You were mentioning this to me before we came up, actually. It was a good point.
Right. So AI is not about algorithms. All the algorithms are open source. Most of the research happens on archive. You can go and refer it to it all. It's all about the data sets that you have. And data sets is what separates the AI companies today. So if you look at Google, which is the biggest AI powerhouse in the world, I would say. So they have a huge data set about users, of what they're doing, of what they're searching for. And that's how they're able to deliver information at the right time, at the right place. Right. So it's all about the data, I would say.
So we had an interesting lesson earlier about microservices, right? As a pattern, as the thing that most folks these days are looking at as the way they should be delivering their products. And I think there's definite upside to microservices. It provides a very clean set of interfaces, independent little components. But I'd also like to talk about the darker side of microservices, which would be once you've deployed these in production and you're scaling your business, you're starting to do many, many revisions of the microservices. What are the kinds of challenges you faced in that environment?
I suggest, I think, I'm not sure. I think I would not say I think we are a deep dive into the microservices, but we implemented microservices for one product. What we felt was, I think there are two dimensions that we need to look at when we are developing microservices. Is it, are we doing the microservices for the technology level, or are we doing the microservices at the domain level? But what we did was we did the microservices at the technology level, that we try to separate the microservices for the lesser development efforts and then faster deployments. That's what I think we wanted to achieve with the microservices. And then we have done with the Node.js, all of our services with the Node.js microservices. What we faced is, I think, we were doing the VM deployments when we were doing the microservices. It's not containers or Kubernetes or any of that. And then what I felt was that should have been done as a monolithic application rather than a microservices to start off with. Because whenever you wanted to start something, a concept, I think I would suggest that I think we should go with monolithic application. Then let's say, I think if you're going big and if you're expanding into the next level, then I would suggest that I think you would split your application into microservices. That's what I learned. I think that's how I think as adoption of the microservices to be done. And I know that now to deploy the microservices and the containers came into the picture in the Kubernetes. Maybe once we have underlying infrastructure correctly done, maybe your microservices can scale well. But as far as I am concerned, when you're doing a POC or the product to start with, I think start with monolithic and then separate it as a microservices. That's how I see it as. Yeah.
Over the years, our product has started using microservices more and more. And for us, the trade-offs become that in terms of maintenance, we are finding that microservices are actually easier to maintain, provided our testing and deployment pipeline is quite good. Otherwise, what happens that one team made a change in the microservices and something else unrelated failed somewhere. And that too, most of the times the failure we will detect only after it moves to production. If it fails immediately, we can still figure out that why it failed. But if it failed after 3 days of the deployment, it becomes really difficult to get. But over the years, our test suite and everything has become more and more evolved. So we are finding in general that whichever parts we have gone as microservices, it has given us more flexibility, because in our case, now it has evolved to a suite of products. So now many things across them is shared because of those microservices. But on the other hand, every time we split something as microservices, and earlier which was a plain just language level function call, instead of that, it becomes a AJAX call or something, which introduces latency of its own. So many times it is worth, many times it is not worth. So the call is highly subjective, that in which case it is worth, which case it is not. And another thing we have started realizing that whether we like or not, we are consuming and using quite a lot of third-party APIs anyway. So in that case, you can consider that external service as a microservice which is not maintained by you. But if you keep your documentation good, if you are doing microservices, test suite and automated test, trigger ups and the build pipelines. Otherwise, microservices, most of the times is going to give more pain than what it is worth.
Yeah, so I think to me, the moment if you have already started thinking about microservices, I think you have already started thinking about scale. Building and deploying something as a microservice might initially look simple, but maintaining a deployed service and the traceability of what dependencies, how these microservices are related, and if something goes wrong, where do we start and where do we identify a problem, right? And similarly, when you scale, like there are so many infrastructure components that are involved, and there are so many developers who are involved in making the entire application work. So I think we have to start looking at the entire software lifecycle management right from the beginning and see how it is going to impact the current processes in-house is something we have to keep in mind before starting a microservices journey.
So microservices for us was more of a natural choice. When we started building software, our team had discrete skills in some ways, which are not part of the same stack, I would say. So we started building software in these discrete silos, and later on built systems which can communicate amongst each other. And then we got to know that we have built something which is maybe called as microservices, right? But microservices, I would say, is a double-edged sword. It gives you this speed of development. It really helps you in testing out very small releases. It helps you test out very small features very quickly. But as some of us were mentioning, that if you're deploying a single tenant microservice-based pipeline for each of your customers, and it becomes really difficult to manage the version numbers, and the tuples change, right? And the set of the version numbers, and so in essential, you're running a different set of software for each of your customers, which becomes a big pain to manage eventually.
So I think we've kind of burned through our time. Hopefully this was a useful, quick glimpse into some of the thought processes around building companies over different spans of time, over different technology focuses, and what it's like to build those teams. So thank you to the panelists for your time and your insights. I really appreciate it.